Have you ever wondered how far a person can stand before something inside it irreparably breaks? Perhaps you have felt that silent pressure yourself, that moment when all inside you screams for justice. This is the story that few books tell, of a woman who carried so much suffering that, in a single night, turned pain into fire. While researching the dusty archives of the province of Pernambuco, I found documents that reveal a case that the authorities tried to bury in the depths of time. Mary de Augusta was not just one more among so many enslaved people in colonial Brazil. She kept a secret that would forever change the fate of the Three Brothers Mill. What you will find out in the next few minutes will shake your understanding of resistance. This is not just a story of revenge. It is a testimony of how human cruelty can arouse forces that no one imagined possible in one person. If this is your first contact with these stories that have been hidden for centuries, get ready for a revelation that goes far beyond what traditional history books show. Let's dive into the depths of a Brazil that many prefer to forget, but that Mary de Augusta forces us to remember. The ruins of the mill of the Three Brothers still persist in the surroundings of Olinda, devoured by the time and vegetation that grows indomitable between the blackened stones. The sweet smell of sugarcane mixed with burnt wood odor seems to have pervaded those walls forever. Those who pass by without knowing their history may only feel an inexplicable discomfort, a cold in the spine that cannot explain. But the oldest residents in the region still lower their voice when mentioning what happened on that New Year's Eve of 1784. True justice does not arise from courts or laws written by powerful men. Sometimes it comes from the hands of those who have been stripped of everything except their own dignity. Mary de Augusta proved that even when the world tries to transform a human being into object, something indestructible remains: the ability to say no more. Visitors who approach the ruins often report a feeling of intense heat, even in the colder winter mornings, as if the fire that consumed that place in a distant New Year's Eve still burned, invisible, fed by the memory of so many broken lives. In the soaply stones that left the big house, some swear to see a woman's reflection watching in silence. If you want to follow more cases like this, which move with all society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any investigation. The Three Brothers Mill was not simply a place of sugar production. It was a complete kingdom with its own laws and borders. It stretched by more than 5 fertile land on the banks of the Beberibe River, with sugarcane fields that ripped like a green and gold sea to where their eyes could reach. The big house was rising over a small hill, built in Portuguese stone with thick walls of 3 feet, high windows protected by worked iron bars, and a large porch that surrounded the entire construction. Below the hill, the senzala stretched like a dark scar in the landscape, a long rectangle of low, winded walls, with poorly conserved straw ceiling that let the rain and the serene pass. There were more of 200 enslaved people, divided only by treaded treadmills on the ground floor. The ingenuity itself was 100 steps of the big house, a robust construction of hardwood and masonry, where the mills spinned day and night during the crop, moved by oxen, or the strength of men who worked on 16 hours. The Albuquerque brothers, Manuel, Joaquim, and Francisco, had inherited the ingenuity of their father, a Portuguese who had enriched through methods that even their contemporaries considered brutal. The children surpassed the father in cruelty. Manuel, the eldest, administered the iron hand mill and a meticulous accounting. Joaquim supervised the work in the sugarcane fields, always accompanied by 2 forens, and his multiple chicots reinforced with small pieces of metal. Francisco, the youngest and most feared, was responsible for the discipline, a term he used to describe the punishments he personally applied to the trunk installed in the center of the yard, between the big house and the senzala. The day in the mill started long before the sun was born, with the sound of the bell that woke up all for work. Children were separated from mothers and divided into groups, the smallest to help in the big house kitchen, the largest for the lighter work in sugarcane fields. Men went to cut the sugarcane or milling, while women were divided between domestic work, the care of smaller plantations that supplied the kitchen, and work on boilers where sugarcane juice boiled. The instruments of control were everywhere. In addition to the whips that the overseers always carried at the waist, there was the trunk in the center of the yard, the chains attached to the walls of the senzala, the handcuffs and iron necklaces that prevented their carrier from laying comfortably. There were also more elaborate punishments: the Flanders mask, which prevented the enslaved people from eating land to commit suicide. The angel, an instrument that crushed the thumbs. The dragon's chair, where the punished was tied naked on metal tips. The architecture of the mill had been planned to maximize surveillance. From the balcony of the big house, it was possible to observe the whole movement in the yard, the senzala and the facilities of the mill. No corner escaped in the eyes of the owners or the overseers. The sounds of the ingenuity formed a macabre symphony. The constant grinding of the mills, the crack of the whips, the stuffy shouts of the punished, the children's crying, the bubbling of the boilers, and above all, the heavy silence that fell over everything when you passed. That December 1784, an unusual heat punished the region. The daily thunderstorms brought lightning but no rain, just increasing the feeling of suffocation. The elders said it was bad omen, the sky over fire without the blessing of water. At night, while people rolled in the damp marts of sweat, Mary de Augusta watched those lightning through the senzala cracks, and in her eyes something was also beginning to burn. Mary was not like the others. Born in the mill, daughter of a Bantu woman and a Yoruba man, she had grown between two worlds of ancestral knowledge that merged into her person. Early on, he demonstrated acute intelligence that did not go unnoticed. While still a child, Manuel Albuquerque's wife, Dona Amelia, decided to bring her to the big house to learn the housework. There, Mary learned to read and write, listening to the classes that the private teacher gave to the children of lords. With a prodigious memory, I absorbed everything he saw and heard. At the age of 18, Mary had become the main cook of Casa Grande, knowing all the European culinary secrets that Dona Amelia enjoyed so much. He knew every herb in the medicinal garden, every root of the nearby forest, every fruit of the orchards. It prepared from the simplest dishes to the most elaborate banquets when the mill received illustrious visitors. His position gave him a unique access. He moved between the big house and the senzala, between the ladies' quarters and the kitchen, between the world of whites and that of blacks. This intermediate position made Mary a central figure in the enslaved community. She was the one who got small favors to relieve the suffering of the most punished, who carried news from side to side, who kept the secrets and stories of all. In her hands, the foods, the drugs, sometimes even written messages that you did not know she could decipher. Therefore, despite the apparent privilege of working in the big house, Mary was never seen with suspicion by the others, knew that her heart remained with them. Over the years, Mary had built an invisible network of trust. He knew every corner of the mill, every routine, every weakness of the masters. He knew who among the forefront would accept some cachaça to close his eyes to small night escapes. He knew the days when Manuel Albuquerque was too drunk to notice any change in his food. He knew when Francisco was collected from the women who forced to satisfy him. He had mentally mapped every movement of the mill like a precise watch. Mary kept another secret that no one suspected. On moonless nights, he taught other women to read and write, using twigs on the ground or coal and pieces of wood that were then burned. He transmitted healing knowledge he had learned from his mother and grandmother, mixing African wisdom with what he observed from the doctors who occasionally visited the mill. He knew poisons and antidotes, knew which plants caused deep sleep and which caused hallucinations or death. The paradox of its existence was evident. The more valuable it became for you due to their skills, the more dangerous became the possibility that they discovered the real extent of their knowledge. Mary lived in constant acting, showing only what was safe to show, hiding her true strength under a mask of servile competence. Leave in the comments, never give up the truth if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. The cruelty and the ingenuity of the three brothers was not exceptional to the standards of the time, but had private nuances and distinguished it. Manuel Albuquerque, with his obsession with profit, constantly reducing food feed, calculating the minimum necessary to keep his enslaved and productive enslaved. People worked chronic hunger, a constant pain that eroded the stomach and weakened their muscles, but not enough to prevent work. Joaquim preferred humiliation as a method of control. He forced the strongest men to kneel in front of him, spit on their faces, forced them to repeat that they were not men but animals. Sometimes, for the fun of visitors, it made adults behave like dogs, barking and crawling down the floor of the big house in exchange for food remains. Mary witnessed many of these scenes while serving the tables, keeping her face impassive as her interior boiled. Francisco, the youngest of the brothers, had sadism as the main pleasure. He had studied torture techniques in books that had to come from Europe and was proud to keep a conscious person in suffering for hours without killing him. His specialty was what he called the skin awakening, whipping precise that removed the epidermis without reaching the deep muscles, causing an excruciating pain and leaving the person exposed to infections. He appreciated to hold these sessions on Sundays, after the Mass that the brothers religiously attended in the chapel of the mill. In March of that year, a young woman of just 15, newly arrived from another mill, tried to escape. It was captured before reaching the river and brought back as an example. Francis ordered everyone to assist the punishment. First, they cut their hair and shaved their head. Then Francisco personally applied 50 lashes, counting aloud as the girl shouted. Finally, he marked it with red-hot iron, not only with the brand of the mill, but with the word ungrateful on the back. Mary, forced to prepare her herbs that would be applied later so that the enslaved would not die from infection, trembled with anger contained. In July, an elderly man, already lodged for the years of work, was unable to fulfill his daily sugarcane cutting quota. Joaquim ordered him to spend the whole night of his feet, tied to a pole in the center of the yard, exposed to the mosquitoes and the serene. The next morning when they found him dead, Joaquim just grunted about the damage and ordered them to bury the body in the ordinary grave, without ceremony or brand. In September, Manuel discovered that some children had harvested orchard fruits without permission. As a punishment, it prohibited all the children in the mill to receive any food for 3 days. Mary managed to hide some flour and secretly distribute among mothers, but it was not enough. 2 weaker children, already weakened by worms, could not resist and died. Manuel only scored in his record book as natural bases. Each of these events was a mark in Mary's soul. Every cry he heard, every wound he secretly dealt with, every humiliation he witnessed was recorded in his memory, as in a book that no one could read. And Mary was not just a witness. She felt every blow, as if it were in her own flesh. At night, alone in his small room at the back of the kitchen, he allowed himself to cry quietly, the tears washing his face, but not his memory. The transformation into Mary was subtle, imperceptible to her masters. Where before there was resigned acceptance, there was a cold and calculating anger. His gestures were still accurate, his expression remained neutral, but his eyes, if someone paid attention, were no longer the same. Something had died, and something new had been born in that look. In November, something happened that broke the last thread that still connected Mary to any hope of justice in this world. His mother, Nunu, already weakened by the years of work on the boilers, was accused of stealing a piece of rapadura. The accusation came from one of Francisco's occasional lovers, seeking favoritism. Without any investigation or proof, Francisco ordered Nunu to be publicly whipped. Mary begged you, kneeling at Dona Amelia's feet, swearing for the life her mother would never steal. It was in vain. The lady just turned her face and said she did not interfere with discipline matters. Mary then offered to receive the punishment in her mother's place, knowing that Nunu would not resist. Francisco smiled and replied that the two would be punished. The mother for the alleged theft, her daughter for the insolence of questioning the decision. Nunu received 30 whip on the central trunk. Mary was forced to watch, prevented from moving by 2 forecasts who held her by the arms. With each scam of the whip on your mother's already curved back, something broke inside Mary. In the 20th blow, Nunu lost consciousness. In the 30th, when they finally released her from the trunk, her body fell inert on the Torero's dirt. Mary ran to her mother, took her in her arms. It was still breathing, but the wrist was weak, irregular. With the help of 2 other women, he took Nunu to a corner of the senzala. For 3 days and 3 nights, Mary didn't sleep, applying herbs, praying, singing softly at the songs her mother had taught her in childhood. At dawn on the 4th day, Nunu opened his eyes one last time, weakly squeezed his daughter's hand and whispered in his ancestral tongue, "Live, daughter. Live for all of us." After Nunu's death, Mary performed the mourning rituals as discreetly as possible. He cut a small strand of his mother's hair, and put her in a lock of cloth near her chest. He secretly buried a piece of the treadmill where Nunu slept under a tree at the boundaries of the mill. For 7 days, it has refrained from salt, speaking only what is necessary and always in a low voice. On the 7th day, when everyone slept, Mary sneaked from the senzala and walked to the edge of the river. There, alone under the starry sky, he took a solemn oath to his ancestors and the Orishas that his mother secretly worshipped. It was not an oath of impulsive revenge, but a promise of calculated justice. He gathered water from the river in a small gourd and slowly poured her on earth, sealing his pact with old words that few people still remembered. From that moment, Mary de Augusta ceased to exist, as she had been until then. On the outside, the same efficient and silent server remained. Inside, it had become an ancestral instrument of justice. The Ingenho of the three brothers was not governed only by the Albuquerque brothers. There was a complex hierarchy of people who supported that cruel system, each with its own role and its share of responsibility. Father Anselmo, who came twice a month to celebrate Mass in the Ingenho chapel, preached obedience and acceptance of suffering as a way to heaven as he closed his eyes to the atrocities that occurred a few steps from the altar. The doctor, Dr. Queiroz, who dealt exclusively from the family and occasionally examined the enslaved people only to determine if they could still work, classifying them as pieces in good or bad condition. There were the forefront, free but poor men who sold their humanity in exchange for small privileges, applying with their own hands the violence that kept the system working. The most feared was Bellarmino, a tall, thin man with a face marked by the smallpox, who seemed to extract genuine pleasure from the suffering of others. His whip was known as the Long Tongue, for it was said that he could reach anyone who tried to escape his vigilance. Completing this mosaic of cruelty were the traders who regularly visited the mill. The trafficker of enslaved people, Seraphim Kudo, who supplied the mill with new workers when the ancients succumbed to the brutal regime. The sugar buyer, Afonso Mireles, who pressed at lower prices, forcing the Albuquerque to extract even more work with less resources. And the equipment supplier, Tadu Lins, who sold from currents to imported torture instruments, always presenting the latest news in human aid. Control technology. Mary knew each of these faces. He served their food, listened to their conversations, watched how they negotiated human lives between pipes of meat and sips of wine. He knew his weaknesses, his vices, his vanities. I knew Bellarmino was pathological fear of snakes, that Father Anselmo could not resist a bottle of Genipapo liquor, that Dr. Queiroz suffered from drop and depended on Laudano to sleep. Mentally cataloging every information, every detail that could be useful in the future. The event that served as the final catalyst took place just 2 weeks from the new year. A ship had arrived in the Recife, bringing a special visitor, the newly renowned Albuquerque cousin of Lisbon, where he was sent to complete his studies. Augusto Albuquerque had left as an ordinary young man and returned as a refined man, bringing in his luggage not only clothes of the latest European fashion, but also ideas considered dangerous, spoke of human rights, quoted French philosophers, questioned the morality of slavery. During a special dinner prepared by Mary to celebrate the cousin's return, Augusto began to exhibit her new convictions. He spoke about abolitionist movements that gained strength in England, about debates in the Portuguese parliament, about the essential humanity of all peoples. The Albuquerque brothers heard in tense silence, exchanging concerned looks. After dinner, they invited the cousin for a demonstration at the back of the big house. There, Francis had prepared a practical class, had tied a man to the trunk, accused of trying to organize a collective escape. With calculated gestures, he explained to the cousin how different types of whip produce different results in human skin. Manuel complemented with an explanation cold about the cost-benefit of different punishment methods. Joaquim demonstrated how submission could be taught through systematic pain. Augustus, horrified, tried to intervene. It was contained by the cousins, who laughed at their European ingenuity. Francisco explained that without these methods the whole colonial structure ruiria, that enslaved people did not understand other language beyond strength. To prove his point, he offered the whip to Augustus, installing him to apply the punishment himself, to get his hands dirty with the reality of Brazil. Mary, who served drinks to you during the demonstration, witnessed when Augustus, pale and sweating, finally gave way to pressure. With trembling hands, he applied a weak blow, which barely marked the man's already lacerated skin on the trunk. The cousins moved their weakness. Encouraged by them and visibly disturbed, Augusto gave a second, stronger blow. Then a third. In the fourth blow, something changed on his face. A mask fell, revealing that the varnish of civilization was just that, a thin layer over the same fundamental cruelty. By the end of 10 lashes, Augusto no longer trembled. There was a new shine in his eyes, a power discovery he had never experienced in Lisbon. The cousins celebrated their initiation with more drink. In the following weeks, Augustus became an avid apprentice of the methods of the mill, sometimes overcoming even Francisco in cruel inventiveness. Mary then understood a devastating truth. There would be no external salvation. No change of change would come from Europe or anywhere else. The only possible justice would be that forged by the victim's own hands. December 1784 had come to an end with a scorching heat that seemed for the fires of hell. In the eve of the new year, as was tradition in the Ingenio of the three brothers, would be a big party in the big house. The Albuquerque brothers liked to sport their wealth and power to the other planters in the region, for important traders and local authorities. It was a time when luxury contrasted cruelly with misery a few steps away. Mary had been called to the presence of Manuel Albuquerque a week before the party. With his usual cold and calculating tone, he explained that he expected the thinnest banquet ever served in the mill. After all, cousin Augusto needed to be properly impressed with family prosperity. 40 illustrious guests would be expected, and everything should be perfect, from the first to the last detail. It was at this meeting that Mary had the confirmation she expected. During the party, the senzala vigilance would be reduced. Most of the forefront would be busy ensuring the safety of guests and their mounts, or serving as additional servants in the big house. Only 2 men would be in charge of watching the enslaved, who should remain confined except those selected for the service of the party. Mary nodded obediently, promising an unforgettable banquet. His words carried a double meaning that the Lord could never imagine. On the morning of that fateful December 31st, Mary was agreed before dawn to start the preparations. Kitchen was sealing activity, with 10 women working under their direct supervision. In the terreros, men baked meat in great skewers on controlled bonfires. In the orchard, children picked fresh fruits for desserts. Mary was everywhere at the same time, proving sauces, adjusting spices, checking the exact point of each preparation. Meanwhile, in the senzala, Father Ignatius, an old man who all respected for his wisdom, discreetly passed from treadmill to treadmill, whispering instructions. Those who had been chosen to assist Mary knew their part on the plane. The others only knew that they should be ready when the signal came. In the afternoon, the first guests began to arrive. Gentlemen in their glossy horses, ladies in slave-laden lights, all in their best clothes, displaying imported jewelry and fabrics. The Albuquerque brothers received them on the porch, while household slaves ran to serve refreshments, sweets, and liqueurs. The orchestra, made up of slaves who played for the entertainment of the masters, performed European pieces in the main hall. Mary watched everything from the kitchen, her face a perfect mask of professional concentration, while her heart beat the certainty of what was coming. At precise moments, he made eye contact with his accomplices, a significant look at John, who served drinks, a small nod to Teresa, which carried food trays, an almost imperceptible movement from the head to Pedro, which supplied the chandeliers with new candles. When the sun began to put, Mary was called to the hall to receive the compliments of the guests impressed with the banquet. He bent humbly before the lad Resent and ladies, who commented on the luck of the Albuquerque to have such a skilled cook. Francisco, already altered by the drink, boasted how his firm hand had trained Mary since she was a child. Manuel calculated aloud as Valeria Mary was decided to sell her. Joaquim suggested that they could rent it to other families on special occasions for a good price. Mary heard everything with her eyes low, the expression servile, while inside she recited the names of all who had suffered and died in that mill, a silent litany that strengthened her resolution. Back in the kitchen, Mary finally executed the decisive movement of her plan. From the sleeve of his dress, he removed a small package of leaves he had carefully prepared days before. He contained a mixture of herbs that his mother had taught him to identify and prepare. Herbs that, combined in exact proportion, produced a powerful tasteless sleep or noticeable smell. With an accurate gesture, he added the preparation to the great punch that would be served at midnight for the New Year's gift. While the guests drank, ate, and talked excitedly, in the senzala, the final preparations were made. Improvised knives with patience of patiently sharp metal for months, resinous wood, prepared torches that would burn with intensity, small tools hidden for so long that they already seemed to be part of the walls of the senzala. The night advanced. The orchestra played excitedly. The gentlemen danced, drunk, wet of their deeds and possessions. No one noticed that Mary, when serving every new round of drinks, made a small gesture for her accomplices. No one realized that specific slaves were discreetly replaced throughout the night, allowing them to take turns between the big house and the senzala, passing information. With an hour left for midnight, when the special punch was already being distributed to the toast, Mary gave the final signal 3 quick beats in a copper pan, which sounded as a natural part of work in the kitchen. In the senzala, Father Ignacio responded with 3 similar beats in a pestle, starting the movement that everyone had expected for so long. While the guests drank the punch prepared by Mary, the effect of herbs began to manifest themselves subtly. It wasn't a deadly poison. Mary didn't just want to kill. I wanted them to see, to understand, to feel the terror of impotence. The mixture first caused a slight dizziness, then a progressive muscle weakness, and finally a temporary paralysis that kept consciousness intact. The gentlemen and ladies who drank began to feel the first symptoms, confusing them with the normal effects of alcohol. As midnight was approaching, the excitement at the party gave way to a strange lethargy. Some guests could no longer get up from their chairs. Others fought to keep their eyes open. The Albuquerque brothers, who had drunk more than everyone, tried to understand what was happening, their tongues too heavy to form coherent words. At that moment, Mary entered the main hall. No more curved or with low eyes, but upright, the straight and penetrating look. In his hands he brought not a tray of food, but a sharp kitchen knife. Behind her, John, Teresa, Pedro, and 5 others came in, each armed with what she could find: skewers of baking meat, wood, cutting axes, sugarcane fields. "Are you feeling strange?" Mary asked, her calm and clear voice in the suddenly silent hall. "It's just a taste of what we feel every day. Impotence, the body that does not obey, the mind trapped in a flesh prison." Manuel Albuquerque tried to scream for help, but his voice came out like a muffled moan. Francisco tried to reach the weapon he always carried, but his fingers did not respond. Joaquim, most affected by drink and drug, only watched with wide eyes of terror. Outside, a riot was heard. The sentries that kept the senzala had been dominated. Now dozens of men and women advanced toward the big house, carrying torches and tools transformed into arms. Some of the forefront tried to resist, but there were few, and were quickly subdued. Mary slowly approached Manuel Albuquerque, the man who had coldly calculated the value of human lives for decades. "Today I didn't come to serve dinner," she said, leaning out so he could see his face well. "I came to serve justice." With an accurate movement, Mary cut off the ropes that held Manuel's tongue, not his physical language, but the symbol of his power, the whip that always kept hanging on the wall as a trophy. He wrapped the instrument around the Lord's neck, squeezing only enough to feel the dread of the asphyxiation, but not enough to kill him. Every difficult breath is a memory of the hundreds that you have suffocated with work, hunger, and despair. He then moved to Joaquim, the master of humiliation. With methodically slow gestures, Mary cut off his expensive clothes, leaving him exposed and vulnerable to all those he had humiliated for years. He put him on his knees, in the same position that he had forced so many men worthy to adopt. "How do you feel the animal now? How do you feel knowing that your life depends on the mercy of those you never considered human?" Finally, the creative torturer arrived in Francis. For him, Mary had reserved the most elaborate treatment. With the help of 2 strong men, he dragged him to the yard, where the punishment trunk was still mounted. There, in the light of the torches and the starry sky of the last night of the year, he tied him in the same position as his mother had been whipped to death. I won't mark it with iron, as you did with so many of us, Mary said, her voice now loaded with an emotion contained for years. I won't tear your skin out of strips as you did for pleasure. Your mark will be invisible but deeper. It will be the knowledge that in the end you were nothing but a weak man who needed the pain of others to feel strong. The big house clock has been 12 times, announcing the arrival of the new year of 1785. As a macabre echo, the chapel bells began to play too, not at the hands of the priest, but those of children who always dreamed of doing so. The sound reverberated by the property, mingling with the stunned screams of the paralyzed lords and the growing crackling of the flames that now began to consume the empty senzala. Mary gathered all in the central yard, men, women, and children who had lived under the cruel yoke of the Albuquerque. In a circle around the trunk where Francis was tied, Mary began a ritual that mixed elements of the various African peoples represented there. It was not a death ritual, but of liberation. Today we break more than physical currents, she said, her voice raising above the noise of the flames that now also reached sugar deposits. We broke the chains of fear that kept us captive inside, even when we dreamed of freedom. One by one, each person in the circle approached the trunk where Francis was tied. Some spit on the floor by your side. Others simply looked into the eyes of the man who had tormented them for so long. Some spoke, naming loved ones lost under their whip. No one touched him. They did not need to stoop to the level of their violence to feel the power of that moment. When the latter completed his liberation gesture, Mary approached Francis again. His eyes reflected the flames that now surrounded the big house. You will live, she said, to the surprise of many. You will live to tell what happened here, to carry the invisible mark of your failure, to know that while you remained stuck to your hatred, we free each other and move on. With these words, Mary cut off the ropes that arrested Francisco to the trunk. He fell forward, still unable to support his own weight due to the effects of the drug. Mary turned her back, disdaining her weakness, and walked toward the group waiting for her instructions. The fire now completely dominated the big house, consuming in minutes which had led generations to build. The flames illuminated the night sky like a gigantic headlight, visible miles away. On neighboring properties, other gentlemen apprehended that unusual light, not imagining that it was the foreshadowing of a new era. In the center of the yard, Mary organized everyone in groups. Some would be in charge of collecting food for the journey. Others would gather useful tools and weapons for defense. A third group would prepare the horses and wagons of the guests to transport the elderly and children. Each person had a function, a purpose in the meticulous plan that Mary had developed for months. Before they departed, Mary led a final ritual of purification. In the center of the yard, they dug a deep hole where whips, chains, Flandry masks, and other torture instruments collected from the house of the floor were deposited. About them, they spilled olive oil and set fire. The flames consumed those symbols of oppression, while voices rose in ancestral corners. Some first sung aloud in that place. We bring us with us only what belongs to us by right. Our dignity, our humanity, our freedom, said Mary, her clipped silhouette against the fire that now consumed the entire complex of the mill. The rest we left to the purifying flames. When the sky began to lighten on the horizon, announcing the first dawn of 1785, a column of more than 200 people was moving away from the Three Brothers Mill. Ahead, Mary walked with firm steps, guiding that improv exodus isado towards the dense woods that bordered the Beberibe River. There, in territories that he knew well of his secret raids to gather herbs, he knew they would find temporary refuge. Behind the group, the ingenuity completely burned, a column of black smoke rising to heaven as a landmark of the end of one era and the beginning of another. Among the rubble, only 3 figures remained alive, the Albuquerque brothers, purposely spared to witness the complete destruction of everything they valued. Mary looked back once, contemplating the work her hands had done. There was no regret in his gaze, just a calm determination. In the first lights of that day, his eyes reflected no longer the fire of destruction, but the promise of a new beginning. The news of what happened in the Three Brothers in Genho spread like fire in dry straw. First, confusing reports brought by travelers who passed through the region and saw the smoke column. Then came the terrified testimonials of the few guests who managed to escape the party, carrying stories about the cook that turned into an avenger. The colonial authorities reacted with predictable panic. The governor of the captaincy of Pernambuco sent an urgent report to the viceroy in Rio de Janeiro, describing the incident as the most serious threat to the established order since the Dutch invasions. He requested additional troops and special powers to deal with what he called dangerous contagion of subversive ideas among slaves. The church, through the Bishop of Olinda, issued a pastoral letter condemning events as work of the devil, calls on all the faithful to denounce any suspicion of rebellion, and reaffirming the divine nature of social hierarchy. The document was read in all Sunday masses for weeks on end. Slave traders sent alarmed correspondence to their suppliers in Africa, alerting a new type of organized resistance and recommending extra caution in transport and sale. The price of enslaved people in the region has rose, reflecting the fear of new uprisings. But the most significant was the impact on other mills. Reports began to emerge from distant properties where similar methods were employed: strategic poisoning, coordinated fires, mass leaks. In some cases, only the rumor of the approach of Mary followers was sufficient to cause panic among you. A new term has entered the vocabulary of colonial fear: the Augusta method. Authorities, planters, and religious used the expression to describe any act of resistance that showed planning and intelligence beyond mere brute force. Mary's name of Augusta, previously insignificant for those who considered her mere property, was now whispered with fear in the halls of the colonial aristocracy. Among the enslaved people, however, the effect was the opposite. The Augusta method became a symbol of hope, proof that even in the more oppressive system, resistance was possible. Mary stories secretly circulated in the senzalas, some facts-based, some amplified by imagination and the need for heroes. In some versions, she had released 1,000 people. In others, he had defeated an entire battalion alone. The geographical expansion of the stories was remarkable. In less than a year, similar reports emerged in Alagoas, Paraíba, and even distant Maranhão. Each new case fed both the panic of oppressors and the hope of the oppressed. The method was not just copied, it was adapted, refined, expanded. In a mill in the Paraíba Mata Zona, the Augusta method manifested itself through a systematic sabotage of production equipment, coordinated by a network of people who communicated through apparently innocent songs. In the Bahian Recôncavo, he inspired the creation of escape routes that use the mangroves as temporary hiding places. In Minas Gerais, he adapted to the context of mining, with slaves secretly diverting gold for years until they had enough to buy collective manumission. The official statute of the Augusta method was sealed when the Overseas Council in Lisbon issued a special edict authorizing extraordinary measures to combat what it described as an organized conspiracy that threatens the foundations of the empire. The document, signed by the minister himself, established rewards for the capture of Mary de Augusta and his main followers. While the powerful shaking in the senzalas and quilombos grew an invisible network of resistance inspired by a woman who dared to turn knowledge into power, pain in purpose, and oppression in freedom. The response of the colonial state was disproportionate, as expected. The governor of Pernambuco, under the direct orders of Lisbon, mobilized the mayor military contingent already seen in the region since wars against the Dutch. 3 regular infantry companies, supported by local militias and experienced Mato captains, were designated for a single mission: locate and capture, preferably alive, Mary de Augusta and his group. The initial strategy was siege and isolation. All the roads that carried inside were blocked. Constant patrols monitored the navigable rivers. Ports and anchorages underwent strict inspections. Any black person traveling without explicit documentation was automatically detained and interrogated. For weeks, these measures produced only false clues and unfounded complaints. The group led by Mary seemed to have disappeared as a smoke. Some officers began to speculate that they might have died in the woods, hungry victims or wild animals. Others suggested that they could have reached some established quilombo and merged into their population. The truth, as often happens, was more complex and ingenious. Mary had indeed led her group to the dense forest, but not without preparation. Months earlier, in her herbal collection raids, she had mentally mapped ways, water sources, fruit trees, and caves that could serve as shelter, had studied animal habits and plant cycles. What seemed impenetrable to the colonial soldiers was a family territory, where each sound and smell told a story. The original group had been divided into smaller units, easier to camouflage and supply. They communicated through an elaborate sign system, tree brands, stones stacked in specific shapes, precise mimicked bird sounds. Some members of the group were occasionally risked visiting established quilombos to exchange information and supplies. The first major defeat of the colonial forces occurred 3 months after the start of persecution. A unit of 40 soldiers, following what they believed was a recent trail, was attracted to a particularly dense forest stretch. Without realizing it, they entered an area carefully prepared by Mary and her followers, a natural trap where the swampy terrain made the movement of men difficult with heavy equipment. When they tried to retreat, they found that the only way back had been blocked by strategically overthrown trees. For 3 days, the soldiers were trapped in that green maze, suffering from insects, thirst, and the constant feeling of being observed on all sides. When they were finally rescued by another unit, 6 had died of exhaustion and fever, and the others were so demoralized that they had to be replaced. This pattern was repeated in different locations in the following months. The colonial forces were systematically taken to dead-end, natural ambushes or hostile territories. Mary never directly confronted the soldiers. Instead, she let nature she knew so well to fight for her. The decisive turn came through betrayal, as often happens in history. One of the members of the original group, captured during an expedition to obtain supplies, broke under torture and revealed the approximate location of the main camp. He was a young man Mary had welcomed, despite her father Ignazio's warnings about her unstable nature. In the early hours of June 17, 1785, a combined force of more than 100 men surrounded a clearing in the woods where, according to the informant, Mary and about 30 followers had established a semi-permanent camp. The attack was coordinated at dawn, when they hoped to find everyone sleeping. To the surprise of the attackers, the camp was almost empty. Only a small group had remained, including Father Ignazio, who had insisted on being despite the signs of betrayal that Mary had noticed days earlier. The old man fought bravely, allowing several young people to escape before finally falling under multiple sword blows. The persecution intensified in the following weeks. The siege was squeezed. Smaller groups were found and captured or killed. Escape routes became increasingly limited. Mary, now accompanied by only 12 closer followers, was constantly moving, rarely spending more than one night in the same place. On August 2, 1785, in what would be known as the Battle of Val dos Espinhos, Mary and her remaining group were finally cornered. Surrounded on 3 sides with a caudal river blocking the only possible escape route, they decided to make their last confrontation. For 6 hours, that small group kept a much higher force in check, using traps prepared in advance, superior ground knowledge, and pure determination. Mary fought on the front line, wielding a machete with the same accuracy as he once handled Kitchen. When the sun began to set, only Mary and 3 others remained alive among the resistant. Wounded by 2 shots and bleeding abundantly, refused to surrender. When the soldiers finally advanced to capture her, Mary deliberately walked to the edge of the cliff over the river. According to the official reports, his last words, pronounced in a firm voice despite the injuries, were, "You can capture my body, but the fire that lit will continue to burn a lot after your names are forgotten." With these words, Mary de Augusta launched on the turbulent river below, disappearing in the dark waters before she could be captured. His body was never found, despite intensive searches in the following weeks, a detail that would feed the legends that would later appear. In the weeks that followed the Battle of the Vale dos Espinhos, the colonial authorities rushed to declare victory. Official reports sent to Lisbon announced the end of the Augusta insurrection and the restoration of the order in the affected captaincies. The head of Father Ignatius and other captured was shown in public squares as warning. Thanksgiving masses were celebrated in the main churches. The Albuquerque brothers received compensation for the damage suffered and land in another region to establish a new mill. However, Official history diverged significantly from the narratives that began to circulate among the population. In the markets, taverns, and senzalas, it was whispered that Mary had not died. She had crossed the river, despite her injuries, and found refuge in distant lands. Some said he had been welcomed by indigenous people who healed her with miraculous herbs. Others claimed that she had reached a secret Quilombo in the depths of the Atlantic forest, where she continued to organize resistance. Objects associated with their history began to acquire mystical meaning. Kitchen knives similar to those she used were secretly stored as protective talismans. Small herbs, prepared according to recipes attributed to her, were hidden under treadmills or buried near the senzalas to ward off the cruelty of the masters. Songs apparently innocent, but with encrypted lyrics that told their history, spread throughout different regions. Over the years, Mary's historical figure gradually merged with mythical elements. In some communities, it was revered almost as a spiritual entity, a powerful ancestor that could be invoked in times of extreme necessity. Reports of appearances became common. A mysterious woman who appeared in mills on the eve of successful rebellions, a healer who visited sick slaves at night and disappeared at dawn, a voice that sang songs of freedom, heard only by those who planned escapes. The place where he allegedly fell into the river became a secret pilgrimage point. Slave people who got a few hours of freedom traveled miles to leave small offerings, flowers, colored ribbons, food, on waterfront stones. Even after the formal abolition of slavery, decades later, custom persisted, gradually becoming a cultural tradition whose origins many practitioners no longer knew completely. Official historians, especially during the imperial period, ignored or minimized their existence. When mentioned in academic documents, it was portrayed as a common criminal, and events in the mill of the three brothers reduced to a simple act of personal revenge without greater political meaning. Only in the late 19th century, with the emergence of a more critical historiography, some academics began to regain their true historical dimension. At the same time, in popular culture, Mary remained alive through string, wheel songs with hidden meanings, orally transmitted tales from generation to generation. Each region adapted its history to local characteristics, but the core remained. A woman who turned knowledge into a weapon, who subverted the system that tried to dehumanize her, which showed a way when everyone seemed blocked. In the remaining Quilombo's communities, Mary's name of Augusta continued to be passed as part of the unofficial history of resistance. Annual celebrations coinciding with the new year included dramatic representations of their history, keeping their memory alive even when school books ignored it. At the dawn of the 21st century, more than 200 years after the events in the mill of the three brothers, academics and activists worked to rescue their history of the imposed silences. Research in colonial archives, oral tradition, and archaeology and historic sites gradually rebuilt a more complete image of who was Mary de Augusta and what she represented. The debate continues between those seeking the rigor of historical documentation and those who value popular memory as a legitimate form of preservation. Perhaps the deepest truth lies in the tension between these two approaches, between Augusta's Mary of colonial archives and Mary living in the collective memory of a people who desperately needed symbols of resistance and hope. What remains undeniable, besides the layers of myth and history, is the poetic image that ends its known trajectory. A woman wounded on the verge of a cliff, refusing to be captured even in the face of certain death, choosing in her last act of freedom the moment and the form of her end, throwing themselves into the waters that, like her, refuse to be contained or domesticated. If you watch so far, it is because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can meet you and know who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video, if Mary de Augusta's story touched her heart. Share so that Mary's memory of Augusta is never forgotten.